Well, throughout the election campaign, we've been checking in with young voters to find out how the campaign's been going for them and how they've arrived at the decisions they have made. Now the election's over, let's check in with them again. Ariana Coleman is a student in political affairs and policy management. Mehdi Bouchentouf is a political science student, and Lesley Mayhew is a political science and public administration student. Good to see you all. Thanks for being here. Let me start by asking you how you would describe the election in terms of whether it inspired, whether it motivated, moved you. What kind of a campaign was it for you?
I think the best word, honestly, is divisive. I think it's been definitely something that has made a lot of people question their relationships with other people. I've had people see on social media, there's a debate whether people can unfriend people over their social media, over their politics, or whether that's okay or not. So that's been very interesting. But it's definitely, for me as a first-time voter, been an awesome experience. I have loved being a part of it, and I've loved encouraging others my age to go out and vote.
Great. Mehdi, how about you?
Animosity is the word I'd describe it with. I think ultimately, though, it was really interesting to see how things kind of boiled down in terms of like national campaigns, but also like campaigns that were limited to ridings, like Jody Wilson-Raybould's, for example. So I think it was like it kept you on the edge of your seat. So it was interesting, and I'm glad I cast my vote.
Lesley, how about you?
It's definitely been divisive, and I would like to argue that this is also an opportunity for people to come together. A minority government doesn't necessarily get to make all the calls, all the shots, but it also gives power a little bit to the opposition. And I think with the whole divisive nature of East versus West and whether there's a Wexit going to happen, I think it's more important than ever to focus on the fact that there needs to be compromise between the parties.
I'm interested to hear those comments. So you found it divisive, maybe a little bit polarizing, and yet how, I'm interested to know why that didn't drive away your engagement, but it kept you engaged. And you could see how this was, a conflict in many ways, that people don't agree, and sometimes it gets pretty heated, and yet that didn't discourage you from wanting to be part of it.
No, I think the opposite, in fact. I think that there's definitely, sometimes this talk about my vote doesn't matter because, it's a wasted vote because we know the outcome already. And I think that being a part of that and having that opportunity to cast my vote made all the difference for me, especially in regards to the political climate right now. Just the opportunity to kind of say what I was feeling in the ballot felt really good.
All right.
Yeah.
Mehdi, how about you, on the issue of particular issues, was there one, because I know we've talked over the course of the campaign, you were weighing a number of different things. Was there a single issue at the end of the day that said, okay, this is what's making me vote the way I'm going to vote?
It was the candidate in my riding, I think, because ultimately, I think I went and looked at the resume, seen where they'd worked, and basically, I built my vote off of that, who I would like to represent my riding specifically.
So you made more of a local decision rather than the national campaign.
Exactly.
But what role did issues play? So there's one thing to have a candidate, but if that candidate's completely offline with the things that matter to you, the chances are you're not going to vote for them. So there has to be some kind of synergy. So how did you connect those things?
Well, my candidate in the riding has a resume very built in education. So they're like a professor in University of Ottawa. They also did a lot on terms of like Indigenous reconciliation. So ultimately on these issues, I think because they had fought for these issues for a very long time, I thought that they were always going to fight for those issues. Ultimately, I think it came down to being a professor, ultimately talking about those issues that face students, and then Indigenous reconciliation was really where she hit really hard in terms of the local debates. So I went with the logic of representation rather than governance.
Lesley, how about you? Was there a single issue that sort of at the end of the day said, okay, this is what's driving my vote?
Well, I wanted to really kind of see more of the electoral reform get addressed in this election, and that didn't actually happen as much. There was only really one party that kind of mentioned it, and it wasn't necessarily something that I wanted or supported, but that was definitely something that took my attention outside of consideration.
I think you'll hear more about it now, given the minority parliament we have.
And the first past the post, I think that's a little bit archaic, and looking at a combination or trying to figure out some kind of solution to our current situation, I think it is definitely something I wanted to see happen in this election, but it didn't happen. And now that this election happened, I think it is emphasizing the importance of how we can actually move in that direction.
Ariana, how about you? One issue?
For me, I think definitely the economics versus environment issue has been at core, being a dilemma. The idea that they contradict each other, but then also can somehow work together, I think is very hard to pinpoint you know, what the actuality is. And on your point as well in regards to the electoral reform, I think that as we've seen through this election, there's not much of a margin for people to want to actually have electoral reform, considering how close and how split the votes have been as of late. So I think no party wants to actually enact it. And, you know, the voters are kind of getting a little bit upset with that, but maybe not as much as we've heard in past elections.
You were part of a phone-in show here on CPAC today. I thought there was an interesting call from a woman who called in to say, look, you make your decision, and I think at one point she said, look, you talk about Justin Trudeau and spending money and deficits. Wait till you're middle-aged and you have to start paying for all these big deficits and so on. And I wanted to hear your response to that. How much, and not so much to her question, but how much did this conversation that we had during the election about spending and investing in people versus the deficit and debt over here, how much did that play into the decision you made, Mehdi?
For me personally, I think you look at the history of how people had access to certain institutions. So like someone who's a little bit older has grown up in an era where you could purchase your home, you could access education, you had more access to things like healthcare. I think ultimately then things like we've been priced out just generally because of how things have gotten expensive. Education has risen so quickly. And I think at that point, that's when youth kind of look to government to say, hey, we need you to close that gap for us because unfortunately things have gone where we can't access it on our own. And even if it comes at the cost of a deficit, it's the fact that like when I get out of school, if I don't have those type of supports, then I can't contribute to the economy. I can't go and purchase things where small businesses feel the fact that my capital is going into them. So I think despite the deficit, I think we still have to find a way to close the gaps where people have access to institutions where they can shape their future.
Lesley, how about you?
I think we need to do a lot more when it comes to educating everyone about these topics because it is definitely an issue. I don't disregard the deficit. I get called out for my math when I say people are afraid of services being cut or rather redistributed, but I like to think of it in the sense of it is an important topic and we need to consider how we can actually redistribute wealth appropriately and what truly is prioritized in our country. So I think for youth, education is heavily important, but not so much that, and more so a focus on industry and innovation combined with education and how the two of them need to be married together in order to come up with more results that way.
Ariana, how about you? How much thought did you give this? Wait a minute, this is a lot of spending, and do I need to worry about it down the road?
I definitely think, and I've said this before, that I think the youth come in kind of from a privileged point in that way, in that I'm kind of watching the background and having things not immediately impact me, maybe in the same way that someone who's older, who's already having, you know, active role more in their community. It is true that I'm still dependent in a lot of ways on my parents, so they're probably feeling effects differently than I am feeling it, and I kind of just get to enjoy the ride and enjoy the election. That being said, I'm still very passionate about specific topics, but I definitely come from a place of privilege in that I can watch it without having as many of the effects maybe directly affecting me.
All right. Well, thank you all for your time. Thanks for touching base with us during the campaign. And, you know, in theory, you get to vote again in 4 years, but it's a minority parliament, so you may get to vote sooner than that. Thanks very much for your time. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.